Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, part of the DOIL Wellness Committee's Be Well series. We are in our next installment where we're talking about effective ways for young lawyers to be able to establish and maintain effective boundaries. We have a great list of panelists here, and I'm so excited to get started with you all. There is a Q&A feature that you guys can utilize. We cannot hear you, so if you want to put questions in the chat, that works out really great. And then also, this does get CLE credit, so you guys can wait until the end, and we'll have that for you as well. Just to get started with our panelists here today, we have Kara Bradshaw. She is a licensed professional counselor based in North Texas. She earned her master's degree in counseling from SMU in 2019. She has experience supporting a diverse range of clients. She has worked across multiple settings, helping individuals navigate everything from everyday stress to complex mental health challenges, including unique pressures of high achieving professionals. She's currently part of the student counseling team at UT Arlington. She brings a grounded, compassionate approach to her work. Kara has a very deep understanding of the mental toll of the legal work and field because of her clinical background, but also she shares a home with an attorney. Then we have Tim Newman. He is currently a partner at Haynes and Boone and a seasoned litigator focused on white collar defense, government investigations, complex litigation, and cybersecurity. He helps his clients navigate high stakes matters involving agencies like the SEC, DOJ, and the Texas Attorney General. He is known for his proactive and tech-savvy approach. Tim is also a dedicated leader in the Dallas Bar Association, and he's on the board there. And then he also chairs his firm's leadership development committee. Outside of work, he's the proud T-ball coach and super dad. And then we have Paige, formerly known as Tackett, but Paige Jensen, who is a commercial litigator at Norton Rose Fulbright, who focuses on insurance coverage disputes, including complex market matters. She has experience in the state and federal courts and manages all phases of the coverage evaluation process. Outside of work, Paige really enjoys doing Pilates and spending time with her friends and family. And I am your moderator today. I'm Artisha Wise. I am currently a associate attorney at Thompson and Co. And I sit on the board of directors this year. But just to get right into it, everyone talks about boundaries and speaks about what boundaries are. You may see about it on TikTok, social media. Kara, from your clinical background, what can you provide as a good definition for a boundary?
Sure. First, Tisha, I want to say thank you for including me on this panel. I am very excited to be a part of it. Also, I don't think I've ever had someone describe me in such an articulate way. So thank you very much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. From the context of a clinical perspective, when we talk about boundaries, we typically talk about it in the way that we interact with ourselves and the world around us. So sometimes it's the way that we engage, sometimes it's the way that we treat others, and sometimes it's the way that others treat us. When I talk about it with clients, I typically break it down into two different sections. So external boundaries are the boundaries you have with other people, and that might be the boundaries in which you set and what you need from other people, but that also might be the boundaries that you're kind of receiving from others. So those are going to be your external. The other boundary is your internal boundary. So these are the boundaries that you have with yourself, and either how you engage with the world, how you treat yourself, how you speak about yourself, those kinds of things. Outside of that, we typically have some other subcategories that we break it down and we like to talk about. Those are some examples of those, but not limited to, like physical, emotional, time, and energy. I think for the sake of the conversation today, a lot of what we'll be talking about is probably like time and energy boundaries. So how are you engaging with your time? How are you engaging with your energy? And those are both internal and external types of boundaries.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's a better perspective than what people are probably getting from social media right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Paige, what are some of the examples of boundaries that you set that have helped you in developing your practice and developing yourself as an attorney?
Sure. And I'd like to start with two basic truths that I've learned about this legal practice. One is that you're never going to have 100% healthy boundaries with yourself and with others all the time. There's no perfect balance in this profession. Some weeks you're going to be drowning in work, and other weeks you're going to have time to come up for air and really have time to take care of yourself. So there's no perfection to be achieved here is number one. And with that, your boundaries have to be flexible. And number two is the demands as a lawyer over the course of your career, and I've been practicing for about 13 years now, they don't really change. So like I'm a litigator and I've been at a small shop, I've been mid-size, and now I'm doing big law. And the demands that I have as a litigator my entire career haven't changed. I still have the same expectations, pretty much the same workload. Things have gotten more complicated and challenging as I've gotten older, but I still have that push-pull every single day as a litigator. And I think transactional lawyers are the same. Like your schedule is just always going to be demanding. So what I've learned is what Kara was talking about is more internal boundaries. I think that's what I've learned most over the course of my career, how to find ways to take care of myself, and really set boundaries for myself because we all have time for ourselves. We just aren't aware of it and we're not maximizing that. And I really didn't learn that until the pandemic hit. So pre-pandemic, I was working like 2,200, 2,300 hours a year, not because I had to, but I just felt like I had to prove myself all the time. And I wanted to be the smartest. I wanted to be the, highest achiever. I wanted the partners to choose me first. And so I was constantly at my desk, and we didn't work from home pre-COVID, which is crazy to me now. Like I didn't take my laptop home. I worked at the office pre-COVID, but when, the stillness of COVID set in and I had time to myself, I'm like, now would be a great time to take care of myself because when you're billing 2,200 hours for 6, 7 years, if you're like me, you'll have digestive problems, your hair will fall out, you'll have chronic headaches, like your body will respond to the stress. Like it just does. It becomes physical. And so for me during the pandemic, I really learned how to prioritize my physical and mental health. So I got really serious about seeing a counselor regularly. I started walking outside. I got into Pilates. Like I started focusing on eating healthier, sleeping better, and it's truly changed my life. And post pandemic, I've learned like I could have been doing that all along, which is really sad. Like I wouldn't have had as much free time as I did, but I certainly could have found ways to take care of myself that entire time, my first several years of practice. And I certainly would have been better off for it. So, long answer to a short question. I've really learned how to set internal boundaries for myself, and I realize it's possible for everybody.
And Tim, what about you? What are some examples of boundaries that you've set for yourself to help you in your practice?
Yeah, well, first, I'll echo a lot of what Paige said, and I'm probably a terrible example of how associates should set boundaries because when I was an associate, I really didn't have any. And it wasn't like I struggled with them and couldn't implement them or enforce them. I just didn't even think about boundaries. I worked. I didn't have kids. I had a very understanding wife who was in grad school, so that's just what I did. The change for me came when my son was born, which late 2017, which is about the same time that I made partner conveniently. But that was really the moment for me when priorities shifted a little bit. And since then, I have prioritized time spent with my kids because that's important to me and it fills my cup. I prioritize exercise. I prioritize sleep. Those are kind of my personal boundaries that I am very inflexible on. Obviously, client demands and work demands interfere from time to time as they have to in a service profession. But those are kind of my parameters that I try to fiercely protect. And I want to reiterate something that Paige said. A lot of it is about priorities. And I was reading a blog recently about a time audit that you can go through just to kind of write down the time that you spend working or sleeping, exercising, going to church, spending time with family. And if you really sit down and map out all of that time, you'll realize that you've got a lot more time in your day than you realize, and you can prioritize some things. It's just a matter of what's important to you. So going through that exercise can also kind of help you understand what things are important to you and how you want to prioritize things.
And it's so great to say that we want to do boundaries and come up with boundaries, but following through seems like a different type of task. Kara, from the clinical perspective, what are some of the challenges that you've observed that your clients or people that you know have gone through when trying to establish those boundaries?
Of course. There are two like clinical kind of discussions that I have with clients around the difficulty in implementing both internal and external, but a lot of the times primarily internal. And the first is like kind of what Paige and Tim have brought up is like what is important to you versus what's being told is supposed to be important to you, right? And so when we have like these, especially in this profession of like, this is your value, like achievement, accomplishment, like those kinds of things, those are supposed to be important to you. But it's maybe not setting or sitting with your soul because it's not as important as you think it is. It's difficult to kind of know and establish, well, where are my boundaries supposed to be? Because this is outlined as like, this is what it's supposed to look like. And then this is how I actually feel about it. And so a lot of the times people struggle because they're not entirely sure where that compromise is, right? Of like what's important to me versus what's being asked of me. And how do I kind of find that middle ground? The other thing, and this is maybe like a kind of a tangent thing, is that a lot of times people don't feel like they deserve it. Like I haven't earned the boundary. I haven't, I'm not good enough to have a boundary. And that's something that maybe isn't like the topic of the conversation today. But if you're finding that that's where you're running into it of like, well, I don't think I deserve it, or I don't think I'm good enough, then that's probably an indicator that there's some like internal work that maybe needs to be done to kind of boost your self-esteem or kind of boost this desire to take care of yourself. Because a lot of the times boundaries are self-care. And if you don't feel like you deserve self-care, you're not going to feel like you deserve to set a boundary with yourself or with other people.
And Paige, what are some difficulties that you've had with like maintaining your boundaries and establish them, especially when you were an associate?
So I think for me, maintaining internal boundary, like drawing a line and saying, hey, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to unplug for work. A lot of that, I mean, I'm my own worst enemy. And I think a lot of that was ego driven. For me personally, early in my career, like I can do this. I'm strong enough to keep working. I'm going to get that extra, brief in this week and make partner, really happy. And I'm going to keep climbing the ladder. I want to be a star. I want to rise, in my class and, keep advancing. So a lot of my failure to enforce my own personal boundaries was ego driven, again, until my body caught up with me and said, you can't live like this isn't sustainable. So I really had to humble myself and realize like I'm not I'm not capable of doing it all. I can't work like this. And again, nobody was putting pressure on me. It wasn't coming externally. I was the one who was driving the bus on my workload, honestly, most of it. But I really had to have an ego check and say, you know what, you don't have to do this. Like, you're not going to get a prize, you're going to get a decent bonus, but like your hair's falling out. Like, so, and money can't fix that, at least not right now. But, so I really had to kind of give myself an ego check and say, I'm not as invincible as I think I am. I need to spend more time investing in myself so that I can make this a long-term profession, because regardless of what size firm you're at, and what niche you're in, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And realizing that you're human, at least for me, that was a big reality check, I think, like right around the pandemic time. And then the other factor for me and keeping my boundaries is just being very diligent about putting things on my calendar. It's easy to get lazy. It's easy to want to sit, scroll on your phone and zone out. For me, I also love to watch a Real Housewives marathon. It just burns off, all the extra stress. But, I don't get anything out of that. So like making sure that taking care of yourself is hard. It's, you've got to be proactive. Like I wish somebody would come do it for me, but they can't. Only I can do it. And so I have to remain like disciplined and diligent about, I'm going to put that walk on my calendar. I'm going to put that Pilates class on my calendar. I'm going to put going to church on my calendar. I'm going to put that dinner with a friend. I am going to put that volunteer, at a DIYL event, get it on my calendar. And for me, like once something's on my calendar, it's very hard for me to take it off. And so I really maximize my Outlook calendar, and I color code for different things. So like personal is in yellow, things like that. So I can look at my week and say, okay, here's where I'm fitting in my personal time. Then when I see it in yellow on my calendar, I look, okay, I've got some good balance this week. Here's where I can fit it in. So I think discipline, and doing that and making sure you're committing to yourself, has been really important for me to maintain personal boundaries.
And we all have to communicate these boundaries and make sure that we're maintaining credibility to ourselves and to those we're establishing them for. Kara, from your perspective, like once a boundary is established, what are some of the points of concern with communicating these boundaries? And how do you encourage your clients to improve on that skill?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is like, who are we communicating to, right? Are we communicating it to ourselves, kind of like what Paige has been talking about with that internal boundary? Like, what do I need? What is kind of the purpose of this boundary? Or are we communicating it to others? And I think the biggest thing is kind of exploring like, who is a safe person to communicate this boundary to, right? Not everybody is a safe person. Not everybody is going to be like receptive to the boundary. Not everybody is going to be open to the boundary, and that's okay. It's not always everyone else's responsibility to kind of hold that boundary for you. It is important that like when you know what this is, you're kind of exploring, what is it I need and who do I need this from? And that's kind of like that credibility piece, I think, is sometimes it can go one or two ways. I've seen is that like it is my responsibility and I got to hold myself to it. And if I don't, I'm going to fail. And like it can kind of go down because we're not holding ourselves to reasonable expectations. And then the other piece is like, well, they're not respecting my boundaries. Like I set them and then they said that's not okay or that's not going to fly or whatever, because this job requires a lot. And I think most people in this profession are kind of aware of what this profession is requiring of them. But when they go into it, it's like, well, I told them and then they didn't respect it. And it's kind of like, and I'm sure Paige and Tim can probably talk to this more about like earning that credibility, but like, what have you done to get to the point where those boundaries are meant to be respected by them? Like how much it's a tough line, right? Of like knowing like, okay, this is what my need is, but also knowing where that need is kind of crossing into job expectations, right? And so sometimes we have to compromise and kind of find like, okay, this might be a need, but if they're not going to meet that need, where can I meet that need? And so that's where that shift from requiring it from that external back into that internal, I think, is really important.
And I know that is difficult for probably younger attorneys to discuss and relate to their bosses. Paige, from your perspective of a younger lawyer, have you ever faced your own challenges with communicating your boundaries with your partners or coworkers? What helped you and what did not help you when communicating them?
Yeah, so I do think that is one thing that I've done really well that's helped me in my career is communicating boundaries, but also exercising discernment in when to communicate those boundaries. And for all the really young lawyers on the here today, like your first to third years here, figuring that out is really hard as a young lawyer. I because you don't know, how long the tasks are going to take you. You don't know how many things you can take on at one time from various partners right out of the gate because you're just young and inexperienced, and things take a lot longer for your first to third years than they do once you get a few years of practice under your belt. So I think it's extremely hard as a baby lawyer. Number one, you just got in the door and you're terrified, that you're going to get fired, or there are all these inherent fears of being in your early years of practice. But number two, you're just still learning to figure out what your boundaries are and figure out, what you can take on from various partners. So I think it's important to be conservative as like a young lawyer as to like what you take on and communicate, here's what I've got on my plate this week. I think I can take this on for you, but I have to get this done first. I think that is extremely important, especially if you're reporting to multiple partners, which many times you're working with more than one. And especially if you are tagged as a young lawyer as being good, every partner is going to want you, because there's a scarcity of really excellent associates. So every partner is going to try and get your attention and get on your docket. And so learning how to communicate, hey, this is what I've got right now. I think I can get this done for you, but just a heads up, don't ever let the partners assume what you're working on, because when they give you assignment, they assume it's going to be the number one priority for you that week. Like every partner thinks that, like that's just how they're wired. They don't know it, and it's not their job. I mean, they're focused on, they have so many things that they're running at one time. They can't be focused on what you're doing too. So it's your job to let them know. And that's honestly a really great way to build credibility, because the better communicator you are, the more you show like, commitment to what you're working on, that's how you build credibility with partners, honestly, in addition to doing that good work. But if you're reliable, you can communicate, and you're responsive, that's a great way to build credibility and help establish those boundaries as a young lawyer. And then, like I said, second prong is exercising discernment, knowing when to communicate those boundaries. You don't want to be the young associate who's like, oh, I have this motion, can't help you, and then shut the door on the partner, because you want to be able to work with as many partners as possible as a young lawyer to figure out who you really like. So you don't want to shut the door on a partner right out of the gate and just turn down work flat out. And you also need to be able to discern, like, am I just really busy these next couple of weeks? Can I really take this on and get, in front of this partner and give him some good work product or her some good work product? And then, my schedule will lighten up in a couple of weeks. Like, you need to figure out, like, yeah, it's, these next couple of weeks are going to be awful, but it'll be worth it to take on this extra project to work with this partner. So there's a lot of discernment, I feel like, involved in establishing those boundaries. And again, that finesse and like that understanding just comes with time, but you do get there.
And from Tim, as a partner currently, do you have a few examples of when associates or other young lawyers have successfully or unsuccessfully established their boundaries or work-life balance with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say at the outset, I kind of think of this as, every associate has kind of a retirement account, right, with respect to establishing boundaries. And if you want to be able to make withdrawals, you've got to make some deposits first. I think that's one framework to think about. How many times do you step up and work the evening or work the weekend or do the quick turn project or juggle a lot of things and step in and really get the work done? Because that's really what's establishing, what you have in your account. And of course, like a retirement account, you don't want to withdraw all of it at the same time. You just want to withdraw the interest. So, Kara mentioned earlier that sometimes you don't feel like you're in a position to establish a boundary, and that can be self-inflicted. It can be, that can be self-imposed and not the way an associate should look at it necessarily. But as an associate, you should aim to be in that position where you don't ever have that question. You know that you have standing with the partner to walk in and say, "Hey, I've really got to step aside for a minute." But yeah, actually, I do have some stories. I'll tell a funny one. The one time I remember throwing down as an associate on a boundary. I'm sure I did it more than once, but the one time I remember, I was in the Bahamas with my wife. And we had gone there for the sole purpose of swimming with the pigs. And if you haven't heard of swimming with the pigs in the Bahamas, you should Google it because it's hilarious and awesome. And I had handled a couple of client calls during the week. I was working with a more senior partner. I was probably a fifth year associate. And they tried to schedule a third call. And it was the day that we were supposed to be on a boat, gone all day to go swim with the pigs. And I had to tell this very senior partner that I was in the Bahamas to swim with the pigs. And there was a moment of laughter, of course. But he, not surprisingly, said, 100%, I'll cover the call. Don't worry about it. I'll update you afterward. But, by that point, I was a fifth-year lawyer. I had established credibility. I had already handled a couple of client calls that week while I was on vacation. I'm not suggesting that everyone should have to do that. But I had some chips in the bank, if you will. As a partner, I I really like for associates to, if anything, over communicate with me. I ask associates to put their vacations on my calendar if we're working on a case together. I want them to put those things on my calendar. I try to be cognizant of those things. If I'm giving an associate an assignment on a Friday afternoon, I try to specify, do I need this over the weekend or is it okay if I get this next week? So I try to be cognizant of those things. But, as Paige mentioned, you can't always be aware of what everyone has on their docket and what's going on. So I appreciate when associates communicate back to me or just ask the question, hey, it's a Friday afternoon. Do you need this weekend or can I work on this next week? The one instance I can remember in the last couple of years where an associate didn't use the discernment that Paige was mentioning. I was speaking at a conference in Park City, Utah, and I don't want to give the impression that I always take fabulous trips because I don't. But these two places happened to be, and I took my wife along. We were going to make a 4-day weekend out of it, couples trip, and so she came along with me. And I got a phone call from a client the day before on an urgent investigation that I had to step in on. It was non-negotiable, had to do it, and so I spent that 4-day weekend chained to the desk in the hotel room working with the client on that investigation. And sometimes that happens. And I had a couple of associates working with me. And when I got back to the office, one of the associates told me, oh, hey, by the way, I'd love to keep working with you on this, but I'm going to be out of pocket this weekend and unreachable. So that was a moment where there probably could have been a little bit better discernment as to when to communicate that he was going to be unavailable when I had just, spent a 4-day weekend at a desk in a hotel room. But, I try to be understanding of associate schedules and their dockets and what they have going on. And I certainly prefer for them to if anything, over communicate when they're telling me what they have going on, whether it's work or personal. I want to hear about those things so that if possible, I can accommodate those.
Perfect. And I mean, obviously, practicing law isn't easy, but it's something that we did sign up to do. Um, what should a young lawyer's expectations be about maintaining the credibility at their firms when they are trying to have their boundaries respected? Paige?
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard. And I think, when you feel as a young lawyer, when you're overwhelmed, when you've got a bunch of deadlines, when you've been, billing 10, 12-hour days for a while, I think it's important to remember in part, this is the job we've all signed up for. This is not 9 to 5 for most of us. And, whether you're, for the transactional attorneys who are on the call today, you can get a call from a client wanting to close a deal, and your whole week's blown up. You're done. You are working until 2 a.m. the rest of the week until that deal closes. And for litigators, when we're getting ready to go to trial, we're working, 12, 14 hours a day, sometimes for weeks at a time. Like that's the gig that we signed up for. And, there are times when I said this in our prep session, there are times when I'm sitting in a deposition and it's awful. The witness is difficult. I got the wrong documents. The partner, I asked a stupid question and I'll look over at the videographer and be like, man, I wish I was you right now, just sitting here and filming it, not, and that's true. I mean, this is a really hard practice but we've signed up for it. And I think one thing that's really cool about being a lawyer in Dallas right now, also not so great, but we've become a really sophisticated market since Tim and I, started practicing, and with all these international firms coming in. And I mean, we've really become a national market, that we really weren't, like a decade ago, we weren't nearly what the market is now in Dallas. And so, we have so many more sophisticated clients doing business in Dallas. And so, the client expectations really are driving the culture and the demands of law firms in Dallas. As a client, we are in the business of customer service. We are providing a service to these clients, and they're the ones saying, hey, we're paying an arm and a leg for this, I want this done, and I want this done tomorrow. And partners are the ones feeling that pressure because that client is their, golden goose. And then for us, as the associates, it's our job to treat our partners like our clients. We're feeling that trickle effect too. And so I just think it's a really unique time to be a lawyer in Dallas because the market is just, there's just so much going on. There's so much demand. There's so much work to do. And so law firms need associates to be able to run at that pace with them, to be able to do that work, to meet the client's demands. And so I think just remembering, like, sometimes it's important to take a step back and realize, like, you're not a victim of circumstance. You working 12 hours a day, for a month straight, it's awful, but like, that's, we signed up for this. Like, we wanted to do something hard. That's why when you tell people you're a lawyer, they look at you differently. They respect you. They're, in awe that you made it through law school and you do what you do, because it's really hard. If it were easy, everyone would do it, and the world would be even worse with more lawyers in it. And so I think it's really important to have that perspective when you're and it's hard when you're in the throes of a really difficult week, and then throw on top of that, let's say you do make a mistake. It's awful. But I think it's healthy to remind yourself, like, I am smart. I've made it this far. I signed up to do hard things, and I can do hard things. So I think that's an important mentality to have when you really are, in the thick of it and just having a terrible week or a month. But with that said, like Tim and I talked about earlier, there's always time to find even 15 to 30 minutes to yourself to just take a breather, take a walk, go get that coffee, go to that DAYL social. Those are all so important in having, just like, you need, to be able to vent, to have some space to yourself so that you can refresh and then dive back in and get back to it. So I think there's a really important mindfulness piece of, like, okay, this week is crazy. I'm going to bill 60 hours, but I'm going to take 15 minutes to meditate, or I'm going to take 30 minutes to go get a quick lunch with a friend, and really find ways to find that balance. Because I guarantee you, if I looked at your phone, I could find you spend 15 to 30 minutes scrolling on your phone a day. And you really have to take that time captive and use it in ways that you will reap the benefit.
Maybe you spend 15 minutes a day on your walking pad while scrolling TikTok at a low speed.
There we go.
That would work.
Perfect.
Tim, do you have anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that we signed up for a profession that, unfortunately, our compensation is tied pretty directly to how many hours we work. So maybe we angle more for fixed fee arrangements and things like that. But I think that's just one of the inherent challenges. And I would just say it doesn't change when you make partner. As an associate, I had this idea that there was a magical line, I'd cross into partnership and then everything would magically change. And I don't want to say that the pressures are worse as a partner, but they're different, right? Because, as an associate, if you tell a partner, like, hey, I'd really like to work on that, but I'm booked up, they can go grab another associate in most cases and get that work done. But if a client calls you as the partner and says, hey, I want you to help me with this new matter, you don't really have the option of saying, hey, I've got this other thing going on right now. Can I flag in somebody else for you? So that's one thing I would say, is those pressures are still there as a partner. And I think that just drives home the importance of establishing those boundaries as an associate and getting to know yourself and what your priorities are, and establishing that good framework early on. I saw we've got some questions coming in. Artishla, do you want to fill those?
Yes. So this speaks to you talking about how, us working hard and our pay is kind of tied to what we do. One of the questions is, how much of the stress is from the golden handcuffs? Like, couldn't we all afford to make less? What do you guys think about that?
No, we could, and we could go do it. Yeah. Go get a job and make less. Yeah, we could.
100%.
But is the pressures of making more and maintaining the lifestyle in which we become accustomed keeping us in the spaces where we're probably working a lot more and stressing ourselves out?
Yeah, I think that's a very personal question. What is it that motivates you? And I I've tried to have checkpoints in my career. Is this still what I want to be doing? Is this still where I want to be doing it? Are there other options out there? And so far, this is where I've wanted to be, and this is what I want to keep doing. Obviously, compensation is part of it because we are well compensated as lawyers. But for me, there's a lot more to it than that, and I find a lot more rewarding about the practice of law than just the money you make.
Are the golden handcuffs worth it? How much does each panelist evaluate that?
I mean, I agree with Tim. That is such a personal question, and I think that's so dependent on so many different circumstances. Like, do you have a bunch of debt to pay off? Do you have, family to feed? Do you want your kids to go to private school versus, like there are so many nuances to that question. And, I think that's a completely personal decision for me. Like Tim's saying, like being a lawyer is like the most fun I've ever had in my life. I think it's exhilarating. I'm never bored. Like I am using my God-given talents and maximizing them and being a lawyer. I truly believe that, and so for me, I know I'm going to work every day and I'm maximizing what I'm good at. And that feels good. And I know, yeah, am I saving one big business at a time? Sure. But for me, that's how I want to earn my income. And then for me, I volunteer hundreds of hours a year. I particularly like to mentor young women, like women law students, college students. So I spend a ton of time outside of work in various organizations, mentoring, coaching, teaching leadership skills to young women. So that's where I get my where I feel like I really am serving the community is finding, I'm particularly passionate about working with first generation women law students, and just really helping them get equipped for their first few years of practice and learning about what being a lawyer is like, because I know that's how I can serve, our community in that way. And I know Tim is very involved in DAYL and has been for a long time, and now is doing the foundation and involved in the DBA. So like I feel like that's how I balance out that feeling of the golden handcuffs, because the firm that I practice at, I'm very fortunate that I do get to have one. I've also established those boundaries myself. Like I like to collect my paycheck and go. And then this is where I also have that balance to go serve and make myself feel even more purposeful in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, and for me, it doesn't feel like handcuffs because this is,
Yeah.
this is what I want to do. If I could give one piece of advice, I would say do some financial planning so that it doesn't become handcuffs, so that you have versatility and options. But it just doesn't feel like handcuffs to me.
And that's a great point, Tim. I think, and my husband would be very glad you said that and would want me to follow up to say, if you are living beyond your means, it's going to start feeling like handcuffs. Like if you're putting that pressure on yourself to keep up with the Joneses, to buy that new Benz, whatever it is, and really max out your paycheck. Yeah, it's going to feel like handcuffs because you've got a credit card statement coming every month, taking away everything you've worked hard for. So I do think as a young lawyer, it's incredibly important to learn how to live below your means. And then when you do want to splurge, it doesn't feel as unmanageable as if you're maxing out your credit card, all the time. I think that's a real
As
point, Tim.
one of those people, I think going into my third year being an attorney, I am at a place where I make a good enough amount of money for myself. I can maintain myself, maintain what I want to do, but I also have valued I want to get great, good experience that I can use and have and take with me in the long run. So I can live my nice little life and buy my little random emotional support gifts when I need them because I have balanced myself. I've talked to a financial planner and I have learned what I need to do to maintain the lifestyle in which I have. So I think that's important. I think their advice is so great because I listen to people like them. I call them the adults who can help guide me and show me what I need to do.
Yeah.
And to all 3 points, like what or Tisha, what you feel comfortable living in and what you feel comfortable splurging, that is totally personal to you. What Tim feels comfortable living in, how he chooses to spend his money with, that is his personal decision. So I think we all have different barometers. And so I think, I think golden handcuffs is kind of like a negative way of seeing this job. I mean, I feel like we all three of us and, most of the people I know, being a lawyer is, I mean, it's such a privilege and I mean, again, it's so much fun. It's high stakes, it's high, the highs, lows, the, wins and losses. Like it's not just a way to make money. It is fulfilling. It is something I go to work, pretty much every day and feel like I've, you know, learned something or contributed something or used my skills for the betterment of a case.
Right. And then, so we have a couple other questions. What would you recommend for young lawyers talking to partners about boundaries if all they know is like a go-getter mentality? And
Tim,
Tim,
want to take
you
that
can
one?
start off with that if you'd
Yeah.
like.
That's a tough one. I think the same concept apply. You're still going to have to make some deposits before you make withdrawals. You may have to grow a little bit more in your account than you otherwise might have to. But in my experience, every partner you have the ability to establish credibility with, or regardless of their mentality or how much of a go-getter they are, you always have the ability to establish yourself as a hard worker and someone who's dedicated to the job at hand. It may take you a little bit longer with some partners, and you could also think about diversifying who you're doing work with. So, if you're not getting the opportunities you like from a particular partner or don't feel like you're learning and excelling and it's just long hours, then maybe that's a sign that you try to diversify and work with some other partners if that's available. But I think every partner allows associates to establish that credibility.
And I would add a couple of things, Tim, that you said. First, partners care just as much about hard workers as they do good workers. So if you're working really hard, but you're not delivering good work product because you're exhausted and you haven't slept in days, your partner's not going to be happy with you. And so I think when you notice your work product is starting to slip, like, you miss a research issue or, something like that, you need to communicate that to your partner and be like, hey, I am stretched too thin. I'm not doing, as quality work for you as I normally do because I've got too much on my plate. I want to give you my best. I think that's a partner's ears will perk up when they hear that because they want to be able to trust you to deliver that quality work product. And I mean, there will be times when you really are stretched way too thin, your partner has you working on too many things. And again, they don't always know that. There are some people who do try to take advantage of you, and that's a totally different conversation. But most partners don't know what you're doing until, and they don't know how, overwhelmed you are until you tell them. So I think that's important. If you see the quality of your work product starting to slip because you've just bitten off more than you can chew, you need to let your partner know because they care just as much about quality as they do as amount of productivity. So, and then to Tim's point, there are partners, and I've seen this in my career, that do just take advantage of good associates and just overload them and take advantage that they're new and eager. I've seen that firsthand. And so that does happen. And in that situation, I think Tim is spot on. Like, bring on another partner how I did that when I was working for a partner who I thought was taking advantage of my time. I reached out to another partner and said, hey, I'd really like to work with you on a project. Can you give me an assignment sometime? That's kind of how I did it. I didn't rat out the other partner. I just said, hey, I'd really like to work with you. Can I take on something for you? And then what I would do was go to I'd get an assignment from that new partner. And then when the partner who was overloading me said, hey, I got into something else, I would say, hey, I just got a new assignment from this partner. I have to get it done for this new partner, this week. Can I touch base with you next week once I've submitted that project? And then that way the partners can figure it out. Like, you're out of the equation. And that way the partners, if the overloading partner is really mad about it, they can go talk to the new partner you're trying to work with. Like, and you don't have to be in the middle of that and then slowly start taking on more and more work with that new partner. That's how I've kind of gotten under an overbearing partner before, is just, get in with another partner.
And we have another question of how do you know if it's burnout or a bad boss / bad firm? And Kara, I would love for you to speak from a clinical perspective of what that may look like.
Sure. Burnout is one of the hot topics, I think, especially coming out of the pandemic in particular, of like that shift from, we all kind of function this way and then everything kind of changed. Now we're trying to get back into what is normal, and normal doesn't look the same for everybody else. So burnout is definitely becoming more of a hotter topic at this point. I think when I'm talking to people about the difference between burnout and the difference between bad boss, there's a few like things I'm on the lookout for. First is the feeling of dread. And I think we all kind of know what that feeling is. I've experienced it before where I'm on my way to work and I'm like, I want to throw up. Like, I do not want to go here. I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to do kind of the work that I'm doing. And so there is kind of that question that sometimes I'll ask clients if they're feeling like a lot of dread of like, will the baby save the marriage, right? Would new work save the feelings about this job? Would a new boss save the feelings about this job? Would, transitioning into a different place save the feelings about this job? And then the answer is yes. Like, would a baby save this marriage? Then it is potentially bad boss, bad work environment, right? That lends me to think like, okay, you're potentially still passionate about the work that you're doing. But if you're just like, no, I hate everything, I have no desire to do anything, I come home, I just binge on anything on TV, or I zone out completely and then I go to bed, that tells me that you're probably closer to burnout. And either two things need to happen. Either we need to uptick kind of the boundaries and reestablish them. Like, okay, what is it that we're missing? What is it that what is the purpose or the need that you're not feeding into here if it is burnout? Or we need to have a tough conversation around what is it that isn't working for you? Like, if this work is not working for you, why is that? And it's okay if sometimes the work isn't working for you, but you might just need to have like that conversation of like, what needs to change? And it might be the job. It might be the field. It might be something that, you might not have even considered. But, Tim made a good point earlier of like doing these frequent check-ins on like, is this still important to me? Is this still something that I think that I can continue doing? And we do this a lot in therapy in particular, is like reevaluating our values, right? Of like, when I first started this career, achievement, acknowledgement, like professional development, those were high on my list. But the more I'm getting into it, how has that shifted? And is the work aligning with the things that are important to me? And if it's not, that's going to contribute to your burnout sometimes. So what is it that needs to shift? How do you meet your values if you don't want to compromise, or if you don't want to lose out on the work that you've spent time doing at this point?
Yeah, and I can't comment from a clinical perspective, but for me, when I'm feeling burned out, um, I'm not as motivated to get out of bed in the morning. I'm not as energized. I'm not as excited about the work that I'm doing when the work hasn't changed. And so the question that I always ask is would a vacation or a break recharge my battery? And if the answer is yes, then it's just, I need a breather. I just need a breather. So when you come back from vacation energized, I don't ever ask myself that question day one after vacation, because that day always sucks. But day 2 and 3, once I get back in the groove, am I excited again? Am I energized? Am I hopping out of bed in the morning ready to go? And if the answer is yes, then to me, it was just exhaustion, burnout. I needed a breather.
Totally agree. And I will say, pro tip, you will not get rested and restored in less than a week off. Like, take a full week. That long weekends don't do it. So if you're feeling burned out, like, don't take a Thursday to a Sunday. Take at least a full week. I would take 7 to 10 days off and go off the grid, go to the beach, the mountains, like wherever you really can unplug. And also just think, you need that time away from your computer, staring into nature. For me, it's going to the mountains and just really thinking, am I tired, or do I need 7 to 10 days off? And then I think the other thing is, are you getting good feedback? Are there partners investing in you? Like, is it because the partners, yeah, there are a lot of difficult partners in this world. I mean, there are. I mean, you have to be a certain breed to make it that high, up the food chain. And do partners have high expectations, and are they short with you sometimes? And yeah, all those things. I mean, that's just the nature, I think, of law firm life. But are you getting good reviews? Like, is your work product, are you getting good feedback? Like, are you getting, that time with partners that you need? Are you getting mentoring and things that you need at that firm? Do you just, have some prickly people you work for? Those are two different things. And so I would think overall, I mean, this is going to being a lawyer, I mean, and going to your job, it's purely an economic transaction, so, and it's like, are you getting what you need? Are you getting the skills and opportunities and feedback you need to develop professionally? And is it worth the money? That's the calculation, I think, for being at a job. It's not all the warm and fuzzies. Yes. Do I love my work wife? 100% love my work wife. Do I, get stressed out by my boss at times? Of course. Are there times where he's frustrated with me, or I, haven't done exactly what he's wanted? And yeah, I mean, but that's just part of the gig. But do I get good reviews? Do I get opportunities? Do I get valuable feedback? Do I get that investment? Yes. And so I think that's also something to consider when you're like, is this the right place for me?
Okay, we have another question asking, do we have advice for helping younger or mid-level associates distinguish between a true emergency work issue from a project that you need to set a timeline on task for, but shouldn't reschedule your entire day for? They see a lot of associates commit to mentoring or other external non-work programs that are really important for the professional development, but then not show up due to work emergencies.
That takes judgment. As a young associate, if I were getting a potential emergency, I would ask the partner, hey, I'm scheduled to do XYZ at 5 o'clock. Is this a cancel situation, or can I still do that and get the work done? And then over time, you just kind of develop judgment as to what the emergency is.
Yeah, I would agree there. That's what I do. I just take an estimate of like, do I need to do this right now, or is this something due that's probably like next week?
Yeah.
Well, and I think also one thing is don't sign up for too much extracurriculars as a young lawyer, that you like have to be in it, because you just don't know, again, you don't know how long it's going to take you to do things. You don't know, what a research project is going to entail, because you don't learn how to be a lawyer until you're a lawyer. You are learning to practice law once you're in the practice of law. Not, law school doesn't teach you how to practice law. It does a great job of teaching you how to pass the bar, but like you're learning how to be a lawyer and you're learning yourself on the job. So don't overcommit your first few years of practice. And then, if you're seeking, I don't know if this is the way the question was worded, it makes me think you're trying to get professional development skills outside of the workplace, which means you're not getting them met inside. That to me is an issue. Because so much of the profession, I mean, I would say 90% of my professional development skills has come from shadowing my partners as an associate, not outside of the office. So I'd be happy to talk to that person more about what they're doing, to just kind of say, I'm concerned if you're, committing to certain things outside to develop skills that you should be developing inside.
And Kara, I think that you could assist with this question that we have as well. If you have a life change, such as having a child, need to care for a parent, or having a personal health issue, etc., how do you go about resetting boundaries in a healthy way, assuming the existing boundaries that you have set are no longer working?
Mm. I think the biggest thing that comes to my mind is, in this moment, what are you willing, for better or worse, what are you willing to sacrifice? There's going to be consequences to every decision that we make, right? Like every boundary we set, it's either a consequence sometimes to the relationship that we set it with, or a consequence to what it is that we're doing. And so sometimes it's like, what are you willing to sacrifice? What is the most important thing to you in this moment? And I think Paige and Tim have really established here that most of the people that you work with, or at least the people that they know, want to know what's going on. Like they've worked with people at this point that are like, please talk to us about this. People cannot help you if they don't know how to help you. People can't work with you if they don't know how to work with you. And as tough as it is to kind of go into this space and say, like, I'm in a vulnerable position now of my life has changed and now I have to share that part with you. And I worry about the consequences of sharing that. I think one of the things that Tim and Paige have really established today is that the field is changing to being more open to working with you, especially if you're a quality, like, therapist or not therapist. I'm sorry, I got a little distracted. If you're a quality attorney, they're going to want to work with you. And so if you're going in there saying, like, things have changed and I need to make adjustments, that is where you're going to get what you need from that. And that's hard. Of course, that's hard. But with practice and with continuing building of like your relationships, the likelihood is that you're going to be able to compromise with the people that you're working with to find a good balance. But it's tough. I get it.
If you all could just give just like a one sentence lesson that you want young lawyers to take from this CLE, I would greatly appreciate it. Tim, you can go first.
Yeah, I would say spend some time establishing what your priorities are. And that's not a, 15, 20-minute discussion. That can be a weeks or months long conversation that you have with yourself or loved ones. But I would say establish what your priorities are and then put a framework in place, a long-term framework that will help you live those priorities.
Paige.
For me, I would say I wish I could go back and redo my first, 5 years of practice and really focus on setting those internal boundaries. Learn what you need to take care of yourself, especially just on a physical level, sleep, food, exercise. Because those external boundaries, the external, we don't have any control of. We have control of ourselves, but we don't have control of when that client's going to call and say, I need XYZ right now. And so really figure out what does that, what does taking care of look like for me? And how do I hold myself accountable to that and find ways to fit it in every single week?
And Kara.
Communication is key. And I think that's been really established in the conversations today is that the more that you talk, the more respect that you earn, the more that you like create a safe environment to come to people with kind of the boundaries that you need to set. And whether that's communication with bosses, communication with professionals, communication with yourself, communication and that language and understanding is important here.
Perfect. Thank you guys all so much for being panelists today. Thank you for everyone who attended. In the chat, you should see the CLE credit, so make sure you get that and enter it in for your hours. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and be on the lookout for any other upcoming DAYL events this month. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.